Champions. I'm Amy Morgan, the featured writer for the San Antonio Marriage Initiative, and I am so happy to introduce you today to Jon Birger. Jon is an award-winning magazine writer, a contributor to Fortune and many magazines, and author of Date-onomics, How Dating Became a Lopsided Numbers Game. His latest book, Make Your Move, The New Science of Dating and Why Women Are in Charge, explains why women should sign off those dating apps and date someone they know from the real world. Jon, thank you so much for being here today.
Amy, thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, Jon, you have quite a resume. You are a serious writer at Fortune and many magazines. What inspired you to switch gears and write about dating?
Yeah, it's usually the first question people ask me. Basically, how the heck did a
Yeah.
business writer who used to write about really boring stuff like oil and gas and the stock market, how did I ever end up writing books about dating of all things? And the answer has a lot to do with the kind of the editorial staff at Fortune. It was more women than men, and it was one of these things where I couldn't help but notice that most of the men were either married like myself or involved in long-term relationships, whereas the women, who I think I can safely say had more going for them dating-wise than we guys did, they were disproportionately single. And the ones I knew well, they were kind of very unhappily, frustratingly single. I mean, some of them had like all these dating horror stories. And it got to the point, and this wasn't unique to the Fortune, my friends at Fortune. My wife and I had female friends with similar, stories about how hard it was out there. And my guy friends didn't seem to think it was so hard out there. So I basically wanted to explore why modern romance had become so much harder for women than for men. And that was the origin of the first book, Date-onomics. And the first book, is really more pop science than advice. It explores how lopsided sex ratios among college grads have kind of spilled over into post-college dating. So basically, for the past 20 plus years, we've had 1/3 more women than men graduate from college. And that's why suddenly you have this 4-to-3 ratio, or nowadays among young grads, it's more like 3-to-2 ratio of women to men. And that's why things feel so much harder for women than for men.
Yeah, because there's so many more, and you talked about that women, and actually men and women, tend to kind of date their same education level and their same social strata. Talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah,
Wait.
I mean, obviously, this problem wouldn't exist if we were all more open-minded, and I wish we were more open-minded about these kinds of things. But the reality is that at the same time that we've seen this increasing gender gap when it comes to higher education, there's also been kind of a simultaneous increase in what academics refer to as assortative mating, which is just a fancy way of saying that people with college educations tend to want to date and marry other people with college educations. And just to be clear, this isn't gender specific. Men are actually even more likely than women to want to only marry a woman with a college education. So this isn't that women are being too choosy. Everybody who's college educated is being choosy, but women are affected by it more just because of the imbalance in this dating market, so to speak.
Well, you had in your first book, you kind of, uncover the problem. But then your more recent book, your Make Your Move book, you had some ideas of some solutions, ways women could kind of overcome this gap, this chasm. What are some of your thoughts there?
So yeah, as you mentioned, with the first book wasn't really an advice book, and I thought just identifying the problem would be enough. But when I got out on book tour with Date-onomics, I quickly discovered that while some women were happy to hear it wasn't their fault, they still wanted me to tell them what to do. And at the time, I had this very snooty view towards the whole self-help genre, and I didn't want to be the love doctor. But in hindsight, I realized it was unkind of me to sort of expose this whole problem and not offer up any hope or solutions. So that's what the new book, Make Your Move, is all about. And the two big themes of Make Your Move are, one, encouraging women to be more assertive when it comes to dating. And if there's a guy you like and you think he likes you, don't just wait and wait and wait for him to ask you out. Just ask him out on a date and see what happens. And if things go badly, you can just blame me. You know, it's not it's not.
You can get on your
Yeah,
social media and say,
yeah,
John, that was bad.
exactly. Yeah. And then the other thing which you alluded to earlier is I am not a fan of dating apps, and I think um, it's increasingly apparent now, but I strongly believe it'll be much more apparent in 5 years that dating apps are having a terrible impact on romance and on our sort of collective efforts to find true love. There was a recent study showing that the divorce rate for couples who meet on apps is 6 times higher than for people who meet in the real world. The breakup rates for people who meet in the real world are much lower. Um, you know, Online dating is too much like online shopping, and what every online shopper knows is that anything you buy online can be returned. And I think this kind of consumerist mindset is infecting the dating world.
I think that whole idea of choosing someone by swiping, and like you, I've been married for almost 27 years, so this wasn't around but this whole idea of choosing someone by a snapshot seems so superficial. And so that was when I wrote my article after our first conversation. I mean, that was, how do you tell your grandma that? Oh.
Well, I mean, Amy, can I put you on the spot and ask you to share with your listeners here the story of how you and your husband met and how important that story is to kind of your relationship?
Well, sure. Well, sure. And then I'm going to ask you
Yeah,
in turn to tell your very quick. I know
I
you have
will.
a very brief story.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's not as fun as yours, but it's real. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, my husband and I actually met. One of my girlfriends lived in his same apartment complex, and I was sitting out with her one day at the swimming pool, reading a magazine, and he walked by, immediately went into his apartment, called some of his guy friends, and said, "Hey, two blondes at the pool, we haven't met yet," and kind of created a party. And by the end of the afternoon, I was, sitting very close to him and reading a French magazine to him.
Right. But this story is kind of important to who you guys are, right?
Right.
It's something you've told and shared, and your kids know about, and it's become this kind of mortar, so to speak, to your relationship. And what really, in all the science on relationships, it shows that these stories of how we meet aren't just cute. They're actually really fundamental to relationship outcomes. And they make you more invested in the relationship if there's something, if you believe it's fate, or as you told me, faith, that led you two together, and you have this really compelling story about how you two connected, that story is going to be important. But sorting through 20 profiles on Match.com and finding the three that are the least objectionable, and then chatting with a few of them, and then narrowing it down to the one who, there's nothing romantic about that. And also there's just this anxiety level. I mean, every young woman I know who's on dating apps, um, the first date begins with Googling the guy to death to make sure that he's actually Robert the handsome doctor and not Billy Bob the married ex-con.
Yeah.
And if you enter a first date with that level of anxiety and uncertainty, and you don't know who this person really is, you don't really know him at all, that's not going to lead to falling in like or falling in love.
Well, and you talked about that. I heard you saying too that if you're going to go on a date like that, a physical date, first of all, you may never have even talked to the person. You maybe have just been
Right.
texting back and forth, and you haven't had a sense of their voice. But then it like that level of, okay, if I'm going to go meet someone, I've got to make sure my best friend knows, and I drop a pin, and
Right.
because you're worried, physically for your safety.
Right. There was a Pew Research survey which came out, I think, last year, which found that a majority of young women consider online dating to be unsafe, and B, 1 in 5 young women have been threatened with physical violence while on dating apps. I mean, if there was some like, neighborhood bar or cocktail lounge where 1 out of every 5 women were being threatened with violence, who is going back there? Like
Yeah.
nobody, right?
Yeah, that's awful. And you talked about too another one of your friends when because you didn't just do, research from publications, you also did a lot of firsthand interviews with people and conversations.
Yeah, I mean, my process kind of starts with the science, looking um, at and the science shows that people feel more of a connection with people who they meet in the real world versus strangers who they meet electronically, either through video chat or email or other kinds of electronic media. So I mean I know what the research shows. The research shows and it confirms that human beings evolved as social animals, and the way we connect with each other is through real world shared experience. So I knew what the science showed, but so then I kind of the next step is to find anecdotes and stories that kind of illustrate the research. And what I think you're alluding to is a friend of mine who she had had so many bad experiences with online dating that she began to describe the online dating as a doubter's game, like she was skeptical. She went into every first date, it kind of became an interrogation because she had so many men lie to her about their jobs, their age, their marriage status, that she just she began like peppering them with questions just to find all the holes in their stories.
Yeah.
um, and I don't have to tell you or your listeners that isn't probably going to lead to a whole lot of second dates. Like
Yeah.
if you enter a first date with so much skepticism and anxiety and fear, to be honest, it's not really conducive to falling in like, never mind falling in love. But she's now engaged to a man who she met through a mutual friend. And what I found so interesting is she told me that before the first date, she didn't even bother Googling the guy. And her view is she didn't have to because she knew that her close friend would never, ever, ever set her up with a guy who was unkind or untrustworthy. Now, she might not click with him romantically. She wasn't sure if she would find him attractive, but that was something that she could kind of explore on the date itself. Um, what was more important is she felt comfortable being with him. There wasn't this level of fear, of like, is he who he says he is? Am I safe? And even though he wasn't exactly what she thought he was going to be, she still said it was the closest thing to love at first sight she had ever experienced. And I think a lot of it just has to do with kind of the comfort level going into a first date. If you have friends in common, or if you actually, better yet, know each other from the real world, whether it's college or church or the workplace or the dog park, wherever. There's going to be some level of accountability. And if he behaves badly on a first date that a mutual friend set them up with, set him up on, there are going to be consequences. Um, a blind date with a complete stranger on a dating app, you know, there's no social accountability with that kind of thing.
And you feel the weight of that, I would imagine. That just that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I, I, I don't know, and I mean, I know there are some out there, but I would say that the overwhelming majority of young women I've interviewed for this book and who've ask me questions and kind of on book tour. They would never go out on a first date with a dating app person without telling their roommate or their sister or their friend, as you said, dropping a pin about where they are. And I don't think young singles realize how different an experience that is from what dating was like before the apps. And obviously, I'm not going to say that there were never any bad dating experiences or violence for that matter before dating apps came along. But the research on this, the surveys on this do show that women feel less safe now than they used to. And I think a lot of it has to do with this anonymity and this lack of accountability that comes with online dating.
Well, you had some great ideas of ways to overcome this and to shut off those apps and do something different. So let's talk about some of your ideas because I liked them.
Well, so the first one is, I have this thing in the book called the Make Your Move Offline Dating Challenge. And, the first move is obvious. It's to delete all the apps, cancel all the notifications, kind of go cold turkey the same way you would if you were doing a juice cleanse or something like that. Except this is instead of being, you know, good for your body, this is good for your romantic life. But yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's important is I truly believe that most singles, not all, but most singles already know people. So I was several months ago, I gave a Zoom talk to a group of college kids at Rollins College in Florida. And we were talking about some of this online dating stuff and not only the safety concerns, but the efficacy, the fact that the relationships don't last as long. And at the end of the class, a young woman raised her hand and she said to me, well, okay, I get it. All the concerns you raised seem valid, but how the heck am I supposed to meet somebody if not through a dating app? So I took a chance, and in general, I don't like asking questions I don't already know the answer to, but I took a chance here, and I put everybody into kind of Brady Bunch mode on Zoom, and I said, okay, I'm going to ask a question, and I would like to raise your hand if the answer is yes. And the question was, how many of you already know somebody from the real world, somebody you like and are attracted to, whom you've ever wondered about dating? 40 kids in the class, 40 hands went up. Now, to be fair, I realized that the numbers are going to be a little different for 52-year-olds than 22-year-olds.
Sure.
But still, I ask some version of this question a lot, and the majority of the people already know somebody from the real world whom they've wondered about dating, somebody single. So my view is if you already know that person, and if you've already identified that person, why would you start from zero with a complete stranger when you really already have a certain comfort level with this other person? And particularly with young people, the response I often get back is some version of, well, I don't want to ruin the friendship.
Yeah.
And like if look, I don't assume that everybody aspires to get married. I mean, people who buy dating books, I write for people who want to get married because that's who buys dating books. But I don't assume that everybody dates with the exclusive goal of getting married. But like if that is your goal, this concern about ruining the friendship seems awfully minor to me. I mean, it's not like you're shopping for a used car here. Like you're looking for a life partner. And yeah, if you were just looking for somebody to go to a wedding with, so yeah, I could see how you wouldn't want to ruin the friendship. But if you're truly looking for a husband or a wife or a life partner, this fear of ruining the friendship seems to me like an excuse to not be bold, as opposed to something that should legitimately hold you back.
You had mentioned when we talked about this, you had something that I thought was so interesting, and it rings so true, being someone who's been married, like I said, 27 years. You said as you grow older, opposite sex friendships are not going to be important very much or at all. And that is so true. I mean, I'm married. I don't have any opposite sex friendships. We have couple friends, but I don't have like a friendship with a guy other than my husband, that, and you said, so that idea of keeping that friendship is probably going to diminish. But, if you're 22, you don't even think about that.
You see, I do have some opposite sex friendships, although I have fewer. I think this has more to do with all friendships. I mean, I have fewer friends that I consider really close at 52 than I did when I was a junior in college, where I felt like I had 100 close friends. Which, so, but to your point, I feel like subconsciously a lot of young singles know that this process of getting to know people through friendship is actually a way of sorting through possible romantic partners. Now, you know, that may be more subconscious than conscious. Um, but I just really feel like if there's a guy out there who you really feel a connection with, and you get a happy feeling every time you're around him, um, wouldn't it be awful if 3 months from now he told you, Susan, I started seeing somebody? I mean, like, and the reality is, guys are oblivious. I mean, the the woman may believe that she sent out all the signals to him that she's interested, but the research, the science on flirting shows that flirting doesn't work. Um, you know, 2/3 of all flirtations go completely unnoticed by the person on the receiving end. And this is whether it's a man or a woman. So I, I've just interviewed so many women who believe, well, he didn't notice my hair flips and my shoe dangles, so clearly it wasn't meant to be. And I'm like, no, I mean I, I, he has no idea what a shoe dangle is. Just uh, be direct, tell him you like him, ask him out on a date, and see what happens. And again, if it really goes south, just blame the crazy dating book you were reading, Make Your Move, and you just blame me. But we're not shopping for a used car here. We're looking for a life partner, and I really believe that there is value to taking big chances.
Well, I like when we talked about, you gave a really great example that I'd love you to tell, about a girl that was at a party, and you talk about the, like, a move, your examples of a move,
Yeah.
and they don't have to be big moves. They don't have to be something that's really uncharacteristic or that would make a woman feel like she was really uncomfortably out of context and character. But
Right.
something that opens the door and lets the man
Yeah.
know, oh, she is interested, because he wasn't getting the flirting cue.
Yeah. So if you suggest to kind of one of these play hard to get book authors, like the rules authors, that a woman makes the first move, they immediately conjure up some image of Cruella de Vil chasing some poor unsuspecting guy down the street. And that's, it's like a scare tactic, and that's not at all what I'm talking about, or others who are making this point are talking about. And the example that you're alluding to was a woman I interviewed for the book. She's attractive, but more importantly, she has a real outsized personality. If she was, like, she probably in a different life she should be doing stand-up comedy someplace. She has she has a big personality, and some guys do find that a little bit intimidating. And she met a guy who she was attracted to at a Super Bowl party. And they were talking for like 45 minutes, and it was clear to her, because she'd had this experience before, that he didn't really know what to do about it. So she just blurted out, "So, are you going to ask for my number?" Now, she didn't have to, like, grab his rear end, or like, send him flowers, or ask him out on even a proper date. All she had to do was kind of open the door wide enough for him to feel comfortable about walking through. Um, Saying something like that makes it absolutely clear that that he's interested. Um, and like, it shouldn't. The clearer and more direct you are, the better. Because, as I said, guys can be really oblivious.
Well, and you had mentioned something too that I thought was profound, that if you speak the words, I like you, I'd like to meet you for a date, that's
Yeah.
actually safer than just perhaps suggesting, oh, do you want to meet for a drink after work? Or, oh, do you want to meet for coffee? Because if you say coffee, he just thinks you're being nice. And if you say a drink, he may not think that you really are interested in a date. So it's
Right.
actually safer being direct, is what
Well,
you
well,
said.
yeah. I mean, think about how the two things sound. You go up to a woman goes up to a coworker and says, "So, do you want to get a drink with me after work on Friday?" In the guy's mind, that could mean many different things. Could mean that she just wants to actually get a drink after work. It could mean that she wants a fling. Like, it could mean anything. A woman who goes up to a guy and says, "Josh, hey, I really like you. I feel really kind of comfortable around you. I've always liked you. Would you like to go out on a date with me on Friday?" That's going to evoke a very different response, than the first version of this. And there's, and I'm not just making this stuff up. There's actual research on this, and there's something that psychologists call the beautiful mess effect. And the idea is basically the more you put yourself out there, the more the other person will put themselves out there in the same way. So that the more emotionally vulnerable you make yourself, that actually reduces the chance that you're going to be taken advantage of, which sounds completely counterintuitive, but we all know people who really put everything out there, and it engenders kind of a real admiration, from the other party. Um, like the author Brene Brown commented on this once, and I think her line was that vulnerability is weakness in me, but strength in you. And her point is that when other people express vulnerability, we admire it. But when we do it ourselves, it feels like weakness. And I think once we can kind of become conscious of these sorts of things, it can give you an edge when it comes to dating.
Well, and you had several favorite places for people to meet. Do you want to go over those really quickly? Because I think everyone's on bated breath. We're like, where's the good place to meet if we turn off our apps?
Well, so, as I said, the breakup rate for couples who meet on dating apps is much higher. There was a study out of Stanford University several years ago, which found that the 1 year breakup rate for couples who meet on dating apps is 18%. I'm sorry, 16%. 16%. People who meet through friends and family, it's 9%. You meet as neighbors, 8%. Meet as coworkers, and personally, I'm a big fan of meeting at work. Coworkers, the 1 year breakup rate is 6%. Meet in primary school or secondary school, it's 5%. And my literary agent actually met her husband in third grade. I think it was literally one of those situations where he was pulling on her pigtails.
I love it.
And then finally, the 1 year breakup rate for couples who meet in a house of worship is 1%. And, um, to me, like, I know a religious person is going to see this through the lens of faith. I see it similarly, but a little different. My general belief is that people with shared real world experiences, shared values, and shared interests are going to those relationships are going to last longer. So whether you met in a bird watching club or in a church choir, it's still kind of reflects shared experiences, shared values, shared interests. And I think that's why these couples who meet in the real world tend to fare better.
Well, I think that is such great advice. It all rings very, very true. And I think to our marriage champions, we can think through that about how we can help our young couples have good opportunities to meet in the real world, knowing how we could really help them have that foot forward. So, John, we could just talk about this forever because I think it's so interesting, especially having young adult sons myself, as you do. Um,
Yes.
but but we have run out of time. So, thank you so much for being here.
Well, Amy, thanks for having me on.
And as always, marriage champions, you can find out more about John and his work at samarriage.org.